Yeah, great to see so many of you here. My name is Nick Bell. I've spent the best part of the last decade working in post-production. I started as a runner at the Mill and went on to become a crowd technical director at Prime Focus. And I just want to talk you through a little bit what it's like going through that sort of career, what it's like in the post-production industry and anything along the way. So if any of you are interested in working in this sort of field, I'll be very happy to answer questions at the end, so keep them in mind. I'm just going to quickly show you my show reel. This is the kind of thing I'll show to people who want to employ me, potentially. And here we go. Thank you. So yes, like many people in this industry, I started as a runner. Mostly by luck, it seems. I was essentially putting my CV through every post house door in Soho I could find. And one of them happened to pick it up and ask me in for an interview. I showed up wearing a shirt, which was apparently enough, and they hired me pretty much on the spot. Now, being a runner is a pretty sucky job, honestly. You're essentially doing all the things that they can't be bothered to hire a janitor for. You're making the tea, you're moving boxes, you're taking out trash, you're moving tapes around Soho. All the post houses around London are mostly grouped in this one area of Soho, just so it's very easy to send out runners rather than couriers. So it's pretty hard-working job. You're on your feet a lot, you're moving around, but it's a great opportunity if you're the kind of person who wants to go into production to just schmooze with the whole company. You're able to talk to everyone, you're really able to get a feel for the company. For everyone else, it's terrible, and I wouldn't say do it more than 4 months at most if you can possibly avoid it. It's not great work, but it is an entrance for a lot of people. From there, I happened to get picked up by Mill TV, who do, as you might imagine, Doctor Who. One of my first jobs there, straight out of carrying the trash out of the building, was murdering David Tennant. It was something of a step up there. I can't say I'm not both a bit prideful and guilty about it. But it was a lot of fun, that work, I have to say, especially because David Tennant absolutely loved being Doctor Who. I mean, I can say what most of you probably already know. He's a lovely guy, but he loved being Doctor Who. And the joy on his face when he saw the effects on sort of his personal screening of Waters of Mars was just, it was really sweet. I was actually his tea-boy for that day. That was my last sort of day as being a runner, so that was hilarious as well. I also did a lot of work on Merlin. Have any of you seen Merlin? You familiar with it? Oh, all right, actually, it's quite a few Merlin fans. All right, fine. So, you know, I've seen posters for Merlin as far as Japan, so I imagine there are a few of you, but not that many. No, the joke around the office, this was about 6 years ago, was that I looked like Merlin, okay? You imagine me without the beard, just a little bit younger, okay? This is all fun and games, until Colin came into the office, at which point it was like, hey, look, it's you, there's two of you, hey, you can be a stunt double, yeah. He fucking hated it. He was not happy with any of it. Yeah, he took it in good grace, but any time we saw each other after that, it was a bit of that sort of awkward, you know, rap parties and whatnot. For any of you who are interested, what little I saw of his friendship with the actor who played Arthur is kind of the reverse of you see in the show. You know, Colin's the one sort of wearing the trousers there. You know, it's you know, he was the one being bossy, essentially. But no, he was a great guy to interact with, and it was a fun show to work on. And there'll be a bit more on that later as well. This was really around the time when I learnt what the pluses of being in this creative industry were. Essentially, almost all of the workers are artists and have to be kept happy. Very temperamental by nature, so you get sort of late starts, 9:30. People can sort of show up when they want before 10 o'clock. You know, there's breakfast and, you know, fruit provided. You know, during lunchtime, people will just break onto the, you know, football table or just play Quake in the meantime. You know, people care if the work is done, but when and how it's done is much more loose. So those of you that might enjoy a kind of more free-form culture, this does vary slightly by, you know, house to house. But it's very much, you know, a positive for me because I don't like turning up on time particularly. But it was certainly interesting, you know, no suits around, etc., etc. From there, after about 9 months of doing tracking, I should explain a bit about tracking. Essentially, it makes sure that the effects don't shake on the screen. It's kind of the lowest form of post-production. You know, it's the step out of the live action. You're only there to make sure that feet don't slide across the floor. Okay, and it's relatively boring. Some people make a career of it. Some people love it. A lot of people just get out of it as fast as they can. You know, it's the bottom rung, really. From there, after about 9 months, I went on to effects. You saw a bit of it there. I did sort of turning into river song, things like that, which some of you might hate, so I quite enjoyed it. Have any of you seen Primeval? 1, 2. Oh, okay, brilliant. Just a little bit. I was really surprised actually that anyone has. It's ITV, it's another channel in the UK. It was their competitor to Doctor Who, and it's basically about dinosaurs falling out of portals into, you know, modern day London. It's actually a lot of fun, but barely anyone has ever seen it. Every one of those portals was made by me. Every bloody one of them. It's, you know, I was spawning dinosaurs for about a year. Which I loved it. It was brilliant. It was just too bad the show wasn't more picked up. And then, you know, regenerations, things like that, which it's actually a shame in a way, because regenerations were the simplest of all the jobs I've done. The more complicated, the more impressive stuff tends to be things that no one has ever seen. But on top of that, I also did the spaceship blowing up in the Matt Smith Christmas special. You saw a bit of that. On top of that, I also did a bit more work on Merlin. I say work. Essentially, for our crowd simulation, one of my friends took a picture of my face, pulling, you know, the stupidest face I could, and stuck it as a test on all the soldiers, you know, just before we had any assets. You can sort of see where this is going. The day before we hit render, someone puts in the wrong number. There's now 300 of me spread across this army in front of, you know, this immortal army. Luckily, no one noticed. I'm now immortalized. If any of you own the Blu-ray of Merlin, just have a very close look at that immortal. You'll see 300 of me going, stuff like that. It was purely accidental, I swear to God. Yeah, from there, I took a sidestep in my career at this point. It's all about necessity. I started doing lighting and rendering. Lighting is incredibly complicated in the world of CG. You're essentially trying to emulate real-world lighting onto something which doesn't exist. And trying to eyeball that, get it right, is a very intricate process. And on top of that, you have to program the shaders. It's layers upon layers of stuff going on here. I didn't understand any of it. I mean, not a thing. Nick, you can do it. No. Fine, you're doing it. It was that sort of situation. And after 4 months of that, I still didn't know what I'm doing. This was for the water creature, for Sinbad. Now, have any of you seen that? Sinbad, this guy? Okay, yeah, no, this is the one I didn't expect. It was a Sky One sort of, let's make an adventure of Sinbad and put lots of money into the first episode. And you ended up with that water creature you saw at the start there, which is both reflective, that's the word, opaque, and a lot of technical work went into this. Again, none of which I understood. Now, I did such a good job on this that the next step in my career was unemployment. Now, this isn't actually true, and this is something that's worth noting about post-production. Contracts, unless you get to the very senior level, tend to be very short-term. Sort of 7 months is about the longest single contract I've had. They'll roll over, I spent 3 years at that place, but they can be ended and cut off sort of quite suddenly, quite a lot of the time. Work tends to fluctuate with what people are willing to spend. This is also during recession. And work can travel around quite a lot. India has started picking up a lot of low-level work. Canada took a lot of technical people over there. Suddenly you're in London and there's no work to do. This is a sort of the downside of post-production, as versus the very free-form environment. So if any of you are really thinking about getting into post-production, it's definitely worth having a plan B in mind. If you can do web design, if you can do anything like that, just something on the side that you can fill in the gap with is certainly a good idea. Yeah, I mean, it's market-driven. If any of you remember Life of Pi, the Rhythm and Hughes company that made that, they basically died straight after it came out. It was sort of a bit of a scandal in the VFX world, but it's kind of the nature of the industry. It's very up and down. This is something that will happen with seeming regularity. It wasn't all bad though. After that, I was backtracking again. It wasn't ideal, but it was a company which actually took tracking seriously, Cinesight. Now, I gave tracking a bad rep earlier, but if you do it in the right environment, it can be a much more of a positive experience, despite being sometimes mind-numbing. But it was all made better, honestly, by the fact that I was working almost exclusively on Robert Downey Jr., as you can say there, big close-ups of his, big eyes, and I'm just happy. I'm what most people would call straight, but even if I find that man sexy, it's that kind of situation. For any of you who've seen Iron Man 3, it's all the stuff on the crane. It was a lot of my work, and my name's big and emblazoned in the credits, so I'm quite happy, despite having done not that much. Also, zombies, World War Z, that was all great. Turning Glasgow into an American city was impressive, though zombies were kind of a normal state in that city. Violence, anyway. And All You Need Is Kill. This is Edge of Tomorrow, it's now called. All through our production run, it was called All You Need Is Kill, which is the most ridiculous name I've ever heard. It might not mean so much if you're English in your first language, but it just sounded so stupid to me. Unfortunately, they changed it. It's actually a Tom Cruise sci-fi film that gave me new respect for him because he actually does all his own stunts, which I didn't expect. Seeing him being flung around in Mission Impossible and things like that is actually him doing it. So a little positive note there. But from there, I went on to doing crowd simulation on the new 300 film, which isn't out yet. Unfortunately, I couldn't show any of the footage, but 300, the first one, was really a guilty pleasure of mine because very problematic film in a lot of ways, but lots of big naked men stabbing things. It's just, So anyway, I was working on the sequel for that during crowd simulation. Essentially, when someone needs a huge army and doesn't want to pay 1,000 extras, we build a brain for it, in this specialized program. Brains are only as smart as you make them, which is to say bloody stupid most of the time. These things will, it's so hard just to get two armies to make them different colors, pre-render, and get them to stab each other. You wouldn't have thought that would be a hard thing to make people racist. It happens plenty in the real world, but actually it's quite difficult there. But they do tend to get on with it, mostly when they're not flying off into the air or folding their legs into their head. It's the most temperamental program I've ever used. I mean, this is a picture of what it looks like to me, mostly when I'm working on this. That's just to make people racist. It shouldn't be that hard, honestly. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's the most technical thing I've ever done. You're essentially programming visually. Each one of those nodes represents what would normally be a programming function. You're tying them together, you're doing it visually. So for someone like me who got that kind of mind but is terrible at languages, it was absolutely ideal. Anyone who's used any Nuke or Houdini before will be sort of recognizing this sort of node-based structure for programs. And as an aside, any of you who want to get into post-production who have any talent with programming, it's definitely very useful in post-production. I mean, it's useful everywhere, but it's very useful there as well. I'd suggest using Python, learning Python. That's the language that pretty much everyone uses in the industry. Otherwise, I'm about the end of what I was going to talk about. If any of you have any questions, I've got a few suggestions up there, especially with the beard. Feel free to fire away. Anyone want to stick their hand up? Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't see that.
About Merlin, I have watched 5 seasons of Merlin, and I can't recall seeing that much kind of, what's the word? No, not very extravagant special effects in it. So, what did you mostly do in Merlin? Was it was it like changing the colour of Merlin's eyes?
There's actually, you're right, there's a certain degree of that. A lot of the effects can be things that you don't notice, like an arrow, things that you might expect to be live action. I think it was season 3 or 4 that I first joined it. It was the one with the naked mole rats. Do you remember that guy? Yeah, big ugly bugger. It's been the bane of my life, actually. But a lot of the scenes that I ended up working with were scenes where you'd get a lot of the creatures put in. Our department, MilTV, was particularly known for its creature work, and creature work takes a lot of work for a relatively small payoff. You'll get, 5 minutes of footage out of months of work. You've got the animation, the texturing, the blah blah blah. So it's more little things like that which I spent my time doing. If you remember the Immortal Army, which the ones that turned into skeletons and Stampede the Camelot, again, all of that was all CG. So it's that sort of thing. Anyone else? Yeah.
What are all the programs you've been using?
Personally, we almost entirely use Maya as our 3D software in CG. A few people use 3D Max, but that's more computer games that tend to use that. A few people use Cinema 4D, though that's very rare. But mostly it's Maya. Everything tends to be Maya compatible. For crowd work, I use Massive, which was made for Lord of the Rings. It's actually basically still the same program, they just sold it afterwards. The thing is a hilarious buggy mess as a result, but it's the only program that does what it does. And for 2D sort of compositing work, once we've made the effects, once we're pulling them in, it's Nuke mostly, moved on from Shake. So if you've got any interest in any of those programs, again, feel free to ask. Anyone else? Yeah?
Is there a lot of divide in the industry between film and television and game?
Oh, completely. It's actually, again, adverts is the other big 3, and it's actually quite hard to move from one to the other, which is funny because that's exactly what I've done 3 times now. they tend to have very divided cultures and workflows. Adverts can be very, literally one person spending a week doing one thing, and it can make some very focus-driven, hyperactive, burn themselves out kind of people, whereas film is much slower, part of a big team, you've got months to work on shots, and you get a bigger end result, but it can be less furious work. It really depends on the person's temperament, which they tend to prefer. And studios are very dubious about hiring between professions unless someone's especially skilled or has a specialization they need. Anyone else? Yeah.
Do filmmakers really understand what kind of time or resources you need, or is it like you have 2 weeks?
Now, I don't want to be rude about anyone, really, but some people absolutely not. A lot of people, a lot of directors are very good with effects, and you'll find that some of the best effects films you've seen recently, like as far as effects goes, things like Pacific Rim or Prometheus or things like that, are from directors who really understand how to use CG and will actually be involved with the process from the bottom quite a lot, or at least have people who do. Some people have absolutely no clue, and this can cause real problems, especially when post-production producers sometimes also don't have that much of a clue. And it can vary very much on the skill and the expertise of the individual. But there can definitely be problems when people don't really understand what kind of work it takes, especially with crowds, actually, because crowds is a lot of front-end work for the result only being right at the end. You only see anything right at the end of sort of the months-long process. And that can cause real stress for producers, like, where is it? What are you doing? What are you doing with your time? No, it'll be there, it's fine, just chill out. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
You said you work in advertising too. Do you think, like, do you get better pay in advertising or in
Pay actually varies more by house than it does by discipline. The place I'm at the moment, Prime Focus, is mostly based in India and can afford to pay its technical people in London a sort of a higher wage than they normally would because they're hiring cheaper people for the simpler work in other countries. When you get to a certain level of skill, that more determines your pay than anything else. Across disciplines, I haven't really noticed much difference in the pay itself, I have to be honest. Anything else? Yeah?
Well, what's the strangest or funniest thing you've ever had to do in the course of your work?
Other than the Merlin instance, a lot of the strangest stuff is stuff I'd love to be able to show people, but never makes it onto the demo reel. Bugs which literally make no sense. As I said, these little agents will fold their knees into their heads and then spin off like a helicopter into the stratosphere. It sometimes happens. I had a situation where I was firing arrows at people with shields. They were dying to the arrows, they were hitting the shields. One shield would repeatedly get hit by an arrow, detach from the arm and spin off and kill half the formation. I couldn't work out why. I just had to cull the guy. I just had to murder him for his own good. He was just being, suicidal. It's that sort of situation. The other point is seeing John Hurt, who was doing the dragon face. We were motion captioning him, so it was actually his face being the dragon in Merlin, covered in little white dots. He wasn't always happy about this. The dots would fall off, it was sweaty in there, it was hot. He was reading out his lines, but he would not always be that happy about it. We had to get one of our receptionists to basically be his makeup lady for the whole thing, to get all this thing, just to flow with him, keep him happy. It was that sort of situation. You're just seeing the raw footage from that before he's turned into a big angry dragon. It was somewhat amusing for me. Anything else? Yeah?
Yeah, how common is outsourcing in your field? Is it worth doing anything basic stuff in-house anymore?
Some places do. As I said, Cinesite is very big on having a very skilled core of trackers, and they really value that. Some places are really, really outsourcing. You'll get places that just do stereo conversion, for example, which is turning films 3D so that we can all get headaches from it. You'll get places which are just dedicated to this. You're not going to go anywhere in that sort of company because that's all they do. And other than having a thing saying I have this much experience in this industry, it doesn't really apply to any other skill. Some places will still do the low-level work, but more and more it does seem to be getting exported to sort of Asia, India, places like that, which is disappointing because it's such a great way for people to get into the industry from the lowest rung. It's very difficult for people to skip the lowest steps and just go straight in because it's just such a technical industry. Anything else? Yeah.
What's your favorite thing you've done on that?
Let's think. I actually really enjoyed whenever I get to do regenerations. Turning Amy and Rory's daughter into River Song was a lot of fun for me. Then that sort of smoochy kiss scene at the end of that, where again they're regenerating all over the place. This was fun effects for me, quite apart from enjoying what it was in, being able to go to my family, hey, look what I did. Look. Being proud. For Doctor Who, I think that was definitely my favourite bit. That's probably why it's on the show reel, to be honest. Sorry, there's another question somewhere over here. Yeah.
So, how did you get interested in this industry?
I started at university doing a course which was mostly web design, which was not really what I was interested in as it turned out. They had a little module for 3D graphics, and this, as it turned out, was what I loved. I loved 3D. I think in 3D it really suited me. So having the chance to do that and then having a master's where I was really able to run with it was absolutely perfect for me. Being able to get into the industry like I did, again, more so, I've actually been quite lucky from that respect. So if any of you have any interest in doing 3D or 2D or anything like that, there are free or trial or legal versions of the programs available, so it might be worth having a little look. Certainly a lot of people, I've never done it myself, a lot of people end up going into 2D compositing, which can be very satisfying work. It doesn't sound like much where you're taking 3D graphics and putting them into 2D live action, but there's a lot of technique involved, there's a lot of work involved. It can actually be a really valid career choice, and there's a lot of compositors needed most of the time. Anything else? You're about to tax that? Oh, I'll let.
What's your professional web read?
Now, in terms of companies worked at, if you work at ILM, you've made it in this industry, and that's the golden ticket to the whole of the rest of this industry. I mean, again, anyone who saw Pacific Rim, saw the amazing effects they put out. They're the Star Wars people. Whatever you can say about the new Star Wars films, they had some brilliant effects in them. So absolutely, being able to go to ILM, travel over to America, being in a situation where they'd be willing to pay your passport, that's like, yeah, you're good, get in here. It's really that. Otherwise, I'd actually really like to work in Canada. It's cold over there, but you guys are used to that, so no worries. But there's a lot of interesting parts of the industry over there, which may or may not be shutting down, so maybe this isn't a good idea. But I love doing I'm such a child at heart. I love doing spaceships and robots and blah 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 and things like that. If I can do them for things like Doctor Who, that's even better. If they have the budget for the effects, brilliant. I'm actually a little bit sad that I missed my chance to work on the new series of Doctor Who. I was busy when they were hiring and I was free when they were full. It's that kind of situation. Anyone who wants to look them up, they're now called Milk. They split away from Mill TV and they're now doing their own thing. So I think they do have a website now. Any more questions? Yeah.
So let's say I'm going to start working in VFX, but I'd like to actually skip the runner stage.
There are a few ways to do that. First of all, having a brilliant showreel is a way. Just being able to say, I'm skilled, hire me. It almost doesn't matter that you haven't worked in post houses before. Especially if you're fresh and people can bring you in. If you've got a brilliant showreel, you see these small, short films that people produce, they normally get jobs off the back of them. Another option that a lot of people I worked with did was Escape Studios, which is kind of like a technical college for visual effects. They hire industry veterans to essentially teach people how to get into the industry and not have to be a runner. It's sort of their MO, is you do not have to be a runner. Some people still are from there, but if you come out of there and you're good, you know, they try and help you get into an actual position. It's a bit more difficult now because there's, you know, a lot of jobs went overseas, but it's still very possible. They are quite expensive though. Was there a question over here somewhere? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about post-production, but I've always wondered why does it cost so much? Why doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Almost all the costs with post-production are on the staff. These are very expensive programs to use. The massive I use is something like 15 grand a year. So it's basically a person's wage just to use the program that I'm using. But a lot of the costs are in that it actually takes a lot of people to produce any kind of real effects. Doctor Who, unfortunately for me, never had the best VFX budget, but it would still take months of work to produce an episode. You'd be working on several at a time, but getting a creature from sort of concept art, we actually would do the concept art ourselves. Do any of you remember the first episode of the Matt Smith with that big starfish crystal thing? There were so many different variations of that thing. You know, some were much more organic, some had eyeballs all over the place. And just getting a version which the client was really happy with was a process in itself. But you know, taking that, modelling it, putting the animation in, not in that case so much, and the textures and, you know, the compositors really is quite an extended chain. You know, it is a big process. You know, you see stuff that is just sort of one person producing it in his bedroom, but again, that tends to take a long time, much more than a normal film schedule would allow for. So yeah, it is a big process. Anything else? Yeah.
Do you think there's a future for visual effects industry in Europe, or if all the departments will be going to other countries?
The real sticking point against visual effects in developed countries is the costs of hiring the labour, essentially. There is some, certainly in Sweden, I'm familiar with, and places, okay. Sorry, this isn't my computer, it's not a computer complaining. There's definitely places in Europe. I know there's a few in Germany, a few in France. We get a lot of animators from France. France is very good at producing animators. So if you hate the French for any reason, which you shouldn't, they're very lovely people, then don't go work in post-production. But as far as I know, there isn't much in Finland, unfortunately. And unless there's a call for a local VFX industry, then developed countries tend not to have their own unless it's already well established. In places like Canada, places like... I mean, this is actually why I went to New Zealand. Apart from wanting to film Lord of the Rings there, it was very cheap to set up visual effects over there. And it's cheap enough that they can actually bring people from overseas and pay them inflated wages and still save on being able to do everything else. Anything else?
What kind of projects are you working right now? I do television or film work.
Right now, actually, I'm working on the new Hercules film starring Dwayne Johnson, who you might know as The Rock. It's I can smell what he's cooking. It's no, that's my big project at the moment. That's going to take me for the next 7 months at least, and that's doing crowd simulation and armies. There's going to be a lot of big battle scenes. It sounds like a ridiculous film. It's actually probably going to be quite cool. I say that because I'm making it. But yeah, that's my big project at the moment. After that, we'll see. It's really one project at a time. It depends what work they have. There might be other stuff coming in after that time. Yeah, it very much depends. Anything else? Right.
What is your backup plan?
My personal backup plan is freelance advertising work. Anytime I'm not working, I'll tend to be talking to advertising agencies, people who might need a visual effects artist. you know, if someone has a pitch for a week long or 3 days of effects for a Coke advert, something like that, you know, they want a swirly bloody Coke around the bottle or something. It's that sort of thing that I will do. So I'm still using the same thing that I've done, but I was able to do that by getting in with the right people when they were working at my company. So to really talk to them, saying, hey, if you need me, etc., you know, having them on the line, that kind of thing. So actually my plan B is the same as my plan A, just in a different department. Anything else?
There's been some news about like Lucasfilm and some others experimenting on using game engines for post-production to make it much easier. What do you think about that, and how it will affect post-production in the future?
I did see a little bit about this. I didn't read the details, and I wasn't sure if they were talking mostly about pre-visuals or actual animation. Game stuff won't generally work that well in film just because of the lighting engine. It can, and we're getting much more advanced game graphics. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a way that's used for sort of lower budget stuff, like, you know, kids TV or even main TV, just things where they wouldn't normally be able to have visual effects. But for main productions, the kind of things that I've been working on recently, it would only be used for the things you'd never see. It's definitely interesting though, because like you say, you have the engine already set up for you. You just need to provide the assets and animate them, which actually can be the difficult part, but it still streamlines the whole process.
If you think about the bridge between video games and film and TV, games from quantum bridge like Heavy Rain or the new Two Souls, Beyond the Souls, how do you see the bridge is gapping, or are they getting closer?
Yeah, I mean, that guy, David Cage, he's been the main one experimenting with me. He's done very well with it, so it's possible that from the game front we'll see a move more towards interactive films, you know, like he did with Heavy Rain. And it's entirely possible with the next generation of consoles, TVs, etc., we're going to end up with maybe a more interactive kind of TV, so they will meet in the middle. I can't comment on it too much at the moment, because, you know, it will be a number of years off, but it's definitely getting closer and closer, especially as games get better and better graphics. Like I say, they're getting more sort of having to put the same effort into them as visual effects right now. I mean, talking earlier about my wet dream, I would like to work in games as well. Unfortunately, my disciplines aren't so, you know, set up for that. They need a few visual effects people, but other than that, it's just all programming all the time, essentially. You know, animators. I'm actually working with a guy at the moment who used to work with Creative Assembly. He did all the animations for, not all the animations, a few of the animations for Rome Total War, the new one. But it's very much kind of just doing loops the whole time. You animate a guy punching, animate a different punch, different kick, blah, blah, blah. It's that sort of thing, rather than, you know, a whole scene where you really get to use much more of your artistic flair as an animator. So as far as working in it goes, some people love being part of computer games, they love computer games. Some people don't enjoy it quite so much. I've gone off topic there, never mind. Anything else?
Can you wear pajamas?
I know a guy who did, so yeah. Now, he was very much a basement dweller. He was working in media transfer, who sort of do the encoding, but he did get away with it, so. They were classy pajamas. So, you know, don't come in your pants or anything, but you got away with it. Anything else? Hi.
What's your favorite movie you worked on?
That I worked on, I loved Iron Man 3. I didn't do that much work on it, but I, you know, again, Robert Downey Jr. And, you know, robots and hundreds of robots and lasers. You know, again, there's only a few films that I could prefer to that if I'd worked on them, but I didn't. So there you go.
So, what's your favorite effect that you didn't do?
I was. Again, I've said this a few times, I was really impressed by the robots from Pacific Rim. I mean, from a technical standpoint, and, you know, the fact that they actually looked fairly decent in 3D and etc., etc. I really enjoyed that. Otherwise, the things I've been involved with, but not directly. Did any of you see Snow White and the Huntsman?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that film, actually. The Mirror Man from that was 4 to 6 months of complete heartache. It's difficult to do. Getting this thing that was solid to kind of become aqueous, melt, go down the steps, look like a liquid, and then reform into a solid was not easy. I can tell you what, the guys who were doing it were literally pulling their hair out from it. So, I have ever said that was Houdini, actually, which is a program I hadn't mentioned earlier. It's basically as technical as you can get with visual effects without having to fully learn to code. You are essentially doing what you saw up there, coding with nodes. Anything else? Are we about done? No? Let's see, what time is it?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Yeah, I think it is about time that we vacate, unfortunately, but I hope you've enjoyed that.
That's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Please clear the set.